Hey guys, so for the last 2 months we've been waiting on our inner tie rod spacers for the Z, which basically increases our steering angle by like 5 to 10 degrees. So for the last couple of hours I've been out here tinkering around trying to figure out how to do it. So I changed out the driver's side to get an idea on how to do this little project. And I think I've got it figured out, so I'm going to show you guys on the passenger side how to change them out. It's basically just the inner tie rod with the rack, and then we're taking that out and putting a rack spacer with the newer tie rods. And they have a little bit of a longer thread so that when the spacer goes on, you still have enough thread for your alignment and thread onto the rack and pinion. This is basically the angle we have right now with just the stock tie rods. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, this one here is actually the new one. This is the old one that came out of the car. And this is the rack spacer. So basically, this goes on to here. And then you put this into the rack. And as you can see, you still have enough threads as compared to the old one. So you can't just like get the spacer and then put it onto the old tie rod, because then you're going to be left with not enough threads to thread it on. So you gotta have the new tie rods. Now I got these from Shinjuku. These are awesome from Shinjuku. They are only 60 bucks for the Z. But yeah, it's pretty simple. And these are a lot stiffer. As you can see, these are very, very loose. And these are much stiffer, so you get a lot better steering response. Alright, so what we're looking at is the tie rod. We have to undo this bolt here, and then we got to take that clamp off, slide the boot off, take the wire or copper pin off, and then we're going to untwist the main inner tie rod and then take it off the rack. So let's get started on that. Well, to do this, you don't have to take the tire off. I forgot to mention that to you guys. And we're going to start with this bolt right here. Alright, and then it is a 7/8. So it's going to take a little bit of elbow grease, but you can break it off, especially if you use like PBM Blaster and you just spray the threads right here. It'll loosen it up, and then you just break it off. Now once you loosen it up and break it, you can usually just undo the threads by hand, or undo the nut by hand, I'm sorry. Just gonna loosen that all the way up. Okay, from here we're gonna go to the bellow. Well, this is a boot, but we also call it a bellow. So we're gonna take off the bellow. We gotta take this clamp off here, and we gotta take this off. Now this is some weird sort of cotter pin. Different Z's, depending on who owned it, what they did to it. You could have different type of cotter pins. What I like to do though is replace this with a zip tie, because I mean, this is a drift car. I'm going to be going through a lot of tie rods, especially if we run off track or do damage, so it's a lot easier just to have a zip tie on here, snip it when you need to take this off again, and then reclamp it with a new zip. So we're going to start with this one right here. Just clamp it together, slide it down, which frees up this piece of the bellow, and then this here we're just going to untwist like so. See, we are untwisting it. We're just going to go round and round until this piece comes off, but I gotta have both hands to do it, so gotta put the camera down. Once you get that untwisted, it's going to take pressure off of it, and this is going to expand. You just simply slide this over the bellow or take it off. Now, like I said, I am replacing this with a zip tie, so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to take this piece off, since we aren't going to be putting it back on. So now we are left with the bellow. The cotter pin is taken off on both sides. Well, the clamp of the cotter pin is taken off. We got this loosened up off of the outer tie rod. So now we're just going to simply slide off the bellow. like so. You're gonna want to thread this all the way to the outer tie rod, that way you have extra space to work. And there is the rack and the old tie rod. That is what's going to be coming off. We got that off. We're going to take off the inner tie rod and separate it from the inner part of the tie rod. So now we're going to separate the inner tie rod with the outer tie rod. You see there's some threads right here on the tie rod. We're going to use a 14 to take. Sorry about that. This is actually a 13 millimeter. So 13. So now all you have to do is get your 13 millimeter and rotate this clockwise until you take those threads right here out of the outer tie rod. So this is separating the inner to the outer tie rod. And as you can see, there are some indentations here where you can grip it with your wrench. Just keep rotating. Eventually it's going to take it out. Loosen it up enough, you will be able to just twist the rest of it out, which makes it a lot easier, especially if you're like me and you don't have a lot of power tools. Now once you twist this enough times, it is going to separate right off of the outer tie rod, which you will see here in just a sec. And it's almost out. There it goes. So it is now separated from the outer tie rod. The outer tie rod's here. We're going to move this out of the way, and we're just going to rotate the tire totally out of our way. So now we can move the entire tire freely. So what we're left with is the inner tie rod, which is totally disconnected, and bellow, which is also disconnected. We just got to slide it back off. There we go. And the only thing left is this piece right here. We have to disconnect this from the inside of the rack, and then our entire inner tie rod will come out. But let's clear up some space. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off the nut that tightens down the inner tie rod on the outer tie rod, and the rest is just going to come right off. There we go. And now we can see the entire inner tie rod. And we have room to work. So we're just going to take this off. Okay, so with everything taken off, you're going to want to put a wrench on the actual rack itself. And then you're going to want to put the adjustable wrench here on the inner tie rod ball joint. That way you don't put any pressure on the rack. Now I did already break it because it does take a lot of strength to break it. And I couldn't possibly film and break it at the same time. So it is taken off. We're just going to finish taking the rest of the ball joint off with the inner tie rod. You can see it's starting to come out of the rack. Just another 5,000 twists to go, and once you loosen this enough, you should be able to just twist off the rest of it. As you can see, the threads are coming out, and it'll be off here in just a sec. And there it went. That was easy enough. However, we did take off the rubber grommet. We do want to keep that back on there. So we're going to put that back on. Okay, now that we've got the old tie rod taken off from everything, we're going to get our new tie rod, and we're going to add the spacer to the end, and then we're going to slip it back into the rack. Alright, now that we've got the spacer on the rack, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to slip it back in, and just twist on. Twist this on. Make sure the spacer is all the way up against the inner tie rod. You don't want it to miss threads. So we're going gonna tighten this down by hand, and then we're gonna get our wrench and we're gonna tighten this down the rest of the way. And then we're gonna slide the bellow back on, reclamp it, so that way it keeps the grease in here. We are gonna clamp it with a zip tie though, because like I said, if you're gonna be taking this piece off a lot on the car, it's a lot easier just having a zip tie on it. And then we're gonna put the cotter pin, or the clamp, I'm sorry, we're gonna put the clamp back on the smaller side of the bellow. That way it keeps all the grease inside. We're gonna reconnect the inner tie rod to the outer tie rod, bolt it back together, and that's pretty much it. So now we need to tighten this down. Alright, so the only thing left is to put the bellow back on. So we're gonna slide this back onto here. Make sure you're gonna have a little bit of an issue getting it over the tie rod, but just wiggle it back and forth, and eventually it will just go ahead and seat on the back. Perfect. And you can see there'll be a little bit of a groove right here, and it's gonna line up right with the groove. Alright, so this is the part we're gonna be putting the zip tie here. That's gonna clamp it down. So we're just gonna go around, tie it down, and then trim it. And yes, we're using pink zip ties because we gotta be stylish. Alright, well the pink one was actually a little too short, so we opted out for this green one here, which is still stylish. We're gonna trim that up, and then we're gonna put the so we're gonna trim that up, and then we're gonna put the clamp over the other side of the boot. So you just simply slide it back on, and then we use pliers to open it up, slide it over the boot. Right, so we have got the clamp on right here. We've got this zip tied down, so this ain't going nowhere. The only thing left now is to reconnect the inner tie rod again to the outer tie rod. Now the easiest way to do it is this tire is going to be able to move freely because it's not connected. So what I found to work the best is to move it out, hold it with your elbow, and then you just simply move the inner tie rod down, which is going to be a little hard because this is a new tie rod. Line it up with the outer tie rod, like so. There we go. And then you hold pressure on the outside of the tire while pushing inward, and then put the 14 back on here. Twist this down, and it'll thread itself back into the outer tie rod. But before we do that, we do need to put the nut here on the inner tie rod. That way we can lock it down onto the outer tie rod. So let's do that next. Here is our nut. I'm going to slide that over. We're just gonna thread this up like so. And then we're gonna reconnect the outer tie rod to the inner tie rod. Just like that. There we go. Now we're gonna hold pressure on the tire, push it in, and we're gonna start threading this down by putting the 14 on here and spinning it back in. So we have got it connected. All we have to do is just keep tightening this down. Now, there's really no way to know exactly where your old tie rod was, so your alignment will be a little messed up. But we can always fix that later by tightening this down, readjusting that nut, and that'll fix your alignment. But for now, we're going to leave it like this and see what we get. Tighten the nut down. We get our 7/8, and we just tighten this down like that. There we go. And that's it. And that's pretty much it. We are totally done. So we're going to go back from the beginning, and I'm going to walk you through this. When you first start, you can leave the tire on. All you have to do is get a 7/8, take this off, or loosen it down to the thread. Then you're going to want to get a 14 and loosen up the inner tie rod from the outer tie rod. That's going to disconnect this piece right here and disconnect the tire from the inner tie rod. Then you're going to want to take this clamp off, take this cotter pin or whatever you have else holding it on, take the bellow off, take the nut off, take everything off the inner tie rod, which will expose the bellow underneath. Then you're going to want to get a adjustable wrench and loosen off the rack while also having a wrench on the rack, that way you don't put pressure on it, which takes that out of the rack and pinion. Pull it off, put the new one back on, and basically just do the reverse process. Put the bellow on, put a new clamp on, which I use a zip tie because I take it off a lot. Put the clamp back on, and then reconnect, or put the nut back on, reconnect the inner tie rod to the outer tie rod, twist it on with the 14 again, tighten it down, and put the 7/8 back on the nut, tighten it down, and you're all good. Alright guys, so we've got it totally done, and gave myself a quick alignment while we were at it because the tires were facing slight bit inward. So let's check that angle. So as you can see guys, we definitely gained a lot of angle from this cheap mod. I mean, only $60 and about 45 minutes of work, and it gives you a good angle. Here's the other side. It's a lot better than we had before. So I'm happy with the outcome. Alright guys, well, it didn't give us a ton of angle, but for 60 bucks, it was definitely worth it. We gained about 8 degrees of angle, which is not too bad. Not for 60 bucks. Now I am going to be getting a PBM kit pretty soon, and that kit's going to give me probably double the angle I have now, but until that arrives, this will be fine. So I hope this helped you guys out, because there was like only 2 other videos on how to do this and they weren't very helpful. So I thought I would show you guys if you ever decide to get this exact same kit that I got. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. That way you can see all the new videos we put out, all the crazy stuff we do. And I'll see you guys in the next vlog.